Okay, so today we're going to switch gears yet again. We are rapidly approaching the end of the semester, shockingly. We're on day 25 of 32-ish. The end is always a little tricky at the end, whether we get 31 or 32 class days. So we're rapidly approaching the end, but this is when it starts to get fun because this is when everything starts to come together and we start to apply different applications and start to work with them together. Before we do that, we need to cover some basics in SketchUp. It was decided a while back that it was important for you guys to get a base understanding of a 3D modeling program, and I think SketchUp is a great, easy-to-use tool. Those of you that are in 136 right now, it will probably drive you nuts to be back working in SketchUp. That's normal. But I do encourage all of you who think you're really comfortable in SketchUp to take the 136 Rhino class and get comfortable in Rhino because I think it has a lot more flexibility than SketchUp does. But SketchUp is good and definitely gets quick modeling results out. It works particularly well in square or rectangular objects. As soon as you start to get into too complicated of curves, that's where Rhino really kicks in. So today, based on your surveys, I look at this every year. It's kind of interesting how the trend changes. But you guys are already pretty darn comfortable with SketchUp. So there's not a whole lot that I'm going to have to teach you in how to use SketchUp. The hope is that over the next several class days, I'll teach you how to make your SketchUp stuff actually look good. So we focus more on how it looks rather than more on the fundamentals of learning how to build with SketchUp. I will do a few demonstrations and I will point a few things out in the hopes that it will teach you a few things, a few ways to work a little bit better. But for the most part, SketchUp is a very intuitive program, and it won't take you too long to pick it up. How many people feel comfortable in SketchUp? How many people have never opened SketchUp before? Okay, see, when I used to ask that question, it was like half the people would raise their hand. So things have changed. So I'm coming under the assumption that you already have some understanding of what you're doing in SketchUp. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open SketchUp 2015. Luckily, that's installed on these computers, and we should be able to use it. And of course, I have an expired trial user. Do you guys, were you able to open yours? Of course, right? All right, hold on a second. And let me see if I can fix this. And then we shall continue. What we're modeling today, before I do any demo stuff anyway, so you can get started, because while I'm screwing around with the license, you're going to model the Francis Ching cube house, which is built out of a series of cubes. You can count the cubes across and start to build up the cube house. We will split today's lecture into two parts. The first part, I'll show you a few kind of fundamental skills of how SketchUp works, and then you'll work for the bulk of the time, and then we'll come back at maybe 10:15, and I'll show you some Photoshop post-processing and how to get results out with shadows and that sort of thing. So we're going to split what we're doing. The bulk of the time will be spent actually learning a few things. Let me see if I can open SketchUp 2013 and demonstrate from there. It's not too different, so it should make some intuitive sense. SketchUp by default tends to open with this person. The person isn't really valuable, so we'll go ahead and get rid of it. I just push the delete key on the keyboard. And then I want to talk a little bit about creating objects and how you work with objects. Like I said, we're modeling the Francis Ching cube house, so it's a matter of making some cubes and understanding dimensions. So I'm going to start with the rectangle tool right here, and I'm going to draw on the ground a rectangle. And if we've been working in AutoCAD, and so we're used to a little bit of command line stuff. While I'm actively drawing the rectangle, in the lower right, it shows me what the dimensions are of that rectangle. So right now it's 2'7" it's 2'1" and 7/16 by approximately 3'5" and 3/16. So if I want to type in a value, say 4 by 4, which is what these cubes are, 4 feet by 4 feet, I can, while I'm still holding the mouse and dragging this, I can type 4 feet, 4 feet, and you'll see that what I type in goes down there in that dimensions box in the lower right corner. If I hit enter, it will actually make the object that's 4 feet by 4 feet. I can confirm that by using the little tape measure tool and going from here to there, and it'll say that my length is 4 feet. Okay? I can then use what's called the push-pull tool right here. to pull the object into 3 dimensions. So I had just a flat rectangle. I'm going to pull it up into dimensions. And again, I can type using the keyboard 4 feet and then enter. And it will make my object 4 feet tall. Now, one of the things that SketchUp does by default is if you attach 2 objects together, and let me go ahead and copy and paste this. I'm going to do Control-C and then Control-V to have a second object. And actually, I'm going to do 2 objects here, like that. So I have these 2 objects. If I attach these 2 objects together, all right, so let me go ahead and move this object from here to there. They're now attached, so if I were to move this object again, see how it stretches the first object? Right? That's one of the things that SketchUp does, is it automatically attaches objects together and kind of grips them. The problem with this is sometimes you want to be able to copy and paste that same object or just a single object. So what I recommend doing when you build out this cube house is to take the first cube, the 4x4 cube, right-click on it and say Make Group. And once it's a grouped object, if we copy it and paste it, so Control-C and Control-V, and I click it together, I can then select the object and move it separately. It doesn't attach together, which is useful. So from here, it's just a matter of copying out. I believe there's 8 total pieces, so that's 2. I can use the Move tool and then press the Control key on the keyboard, and you see that the Move cursor adds a little plus sign. It means that I'm going to make copies instead of moving. And I can go through, and again, Control. That's 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so I have those 8 squares. I need to make the ramp that goes down this side, right? Before I do that, I could take all of these and copy them backwards, right? So I can, again, use the Move tool, press the Control key, and I can copy these backwards in space, going back that way. I'm not going to do them all right now. But these front 3, I need to make a ramp. And so because they're groups right now, I can't quite work with them. So at this point, I'm going to select the 3 at the end, which will make the ramp. I'll right-click, and I'll say Ungroup. Or excuse me, it's Explode, right, which makes them individual objects. And now I'll take the Pencil tool, or the Line tool, and I'll draw a diagonal line across the front. And so what SketchUp does is whenever you bisect a surface with a line, it splits the surface into 2 parts. So once I have that surface split into 2 parts, I can actually select on these parts, press the Delete key, and have them go away. Right? And I can delete these top surfaces like that, and the bottom surfaces there. Now I need another line that goes across the inside. So I'll go from here down to there. And you see that when I create that line, it then makes a surface because it's enclosed by 4 lines. If I drag a line across there and there, right, it'll divide these surfaces such that I can go in and I can select the surface, press Delete, and this surface and press Delete. And then it's just a matter of deleting the leftover little bits of lines. There's a lot of ways of doing it. There's also duplicate surfaces along this edge. So I'm going to go ahead and delete those duplicate surfaces like that. Right? So the other thing, well, let me go ahead and go back, and I'll show you guys what Henry was talking about. He was saying this was too tedious of a method. So we'll jump ourselves back to right here, where I had just drawn that line. You can, again, use the Push-Pull tool, and you can push these surfaces back like that, which is a lot faster way of doing it, right? So there's always lots of ways of modeling. I'm just trying to show you the technical solutions here. So we also need to draw out this little piece that jumps out. So I can draw it by hand. I can go, say, 4 feet here and draw that. And then I can draw this side of it like that. And then I could use the Push-Pull tool and pull these up and pull these up, like so. Okay? So that's for that little front piece. And I can continue doing this, basically the same strategy right, to build the rest of the pieces of this. I'm not expecting the detail to be perfect. I also invite you to embellish the house in your own free way. We only see the front two sides, so what happens on the back sides, we don't really know, but you can do whatever you want with it. I'm going to encourage you to really play around with it, get comfortable with it, model this out. We'll get into more technical stuff next class, but I really want you to just have the experience, and I can go around and check and see where people are and how far they've come along. Like I said, we'll stop this modeling at about 10:15 or so, and I'm going to show you how to do the post-processing in Photoshop, which is part 3 of this exercise. So work from now until then, and then we'll talk about the second half at that point. Are there any questions? No? All right. Okay, so I'm going to start up a bit early because it seems that most of you are finishing up or at a place where it makes sense to move on to the next phase of this. And so, as I said before, one of the big things about what we're going to be doing in SketchUp is not so much learning how to model in SketchUp, because I think you can pick that up very fast on your own, but how to make SketchUp look better than just the default SketchUp views that we have. So we'll spend a lot of time really trying to make good drawings out of SketchUp, which involves a lot of Photoshop work. And so I'm going to walk through the first pieces of the Photoshop work today, which is essentially adding shadows and enhancing the shadows and enhancing the overall look of the image. So what I've done is I've gone in and done a couple things. One, I went to the Styles window. So if I go to Window and then Styles, it brings up the Styles editor, and you've probably explored this before. By default, I think your style is probably something like this in default colors. That would be my guess. We're going to switch, excuse me, under default styles, we're going to pick something called Hidden Line. And sometimes it's a little hard to tell which of these little icons is the one that we're looking for. If you mouse over it, you'll get a little yellow box that'll say the style. And so we're looking for something called Hidden Line, which is essentially a very basic line drawing. There's not much going on here. It's very plain. It does, however, by default include the axes in red, green, and blue for the X, Y, and Z axes. We want to turn those off so we have just a nice drawing without those. So I'll go to the View menu, and I'm going to uncheck Axes, and I'll go to View, and I'll uncheck Guides. And you see that those axes go away. If you had guides, those would go away as well. So once again, it's under the View menu, and you'll turn off the axes and turn off the guides, which gives us essentially a plain line drawing. And at this point, we want to establish the view that we want to ultimately do in this particular view. And so maybe something like that is nice. Again, it's up to you as to what view you pick. I'm just picking one at random. So once I have this established, I need to start the output process. And we're going to do several outputs in a row. One of the things that's important, though, is that we don't move the scene in the middle of doing an output, right? So once I have the view established, that's going to be the view. You can save the view by going to Window and then Scenes. And here, you can click the little plus icon and save this. So let me save as a new style. I'll create a scene. And this is now Scene 3. And we can leave it named as Scene 3, or you could rename it. The nice thing here is that if I accidentally went and moved it, I can come back to Scene 3 and double-click on it, and I'll go back to that view. The reason we want it to be the same is we're going to load them all up in Photoshop and then use a multiply blending mode to start to see through the drawings and put them together. So I want them all to be exactly the same, which they are now. I have my hidden line, which is basically my line view showing. And I'm going to go to the File menu, and I'm going to go to Export 2D Graphic. And in here, in the Export 2D Graphic, I'm going to choose the JPEG image, and I'm also going to click on the Options button. And so now this is a really important piece of this puzzle. If we check the box for Use View Size, we get 1916 by 904 pixels. Okay? Now, if we were going to go print this on a regular printer, the minimum resolution for a regular printer is 300 pixels per inch of printing. Okay? The plotters will print up to 600 pixels per inch. So if we wanted to make this larger, we'd have to do the multiplication in our head. Say we wanted it to be 10 inches when it was finally printed. So we're going to print on an 8.5 by 11 sheet. We wanted it to be 10 inches or so. We would need that to be about 3,000 pixels. So I'm going to uncheck the box for use view size, and I'm going to type in under width 3,000. Right? And the height automatically adjusts for me. Okay? So I'll go ahead with 3,000, the slider all the way to best quality. I'll go ahead and say OK. And then I'm going to save this onto my flash drive. Maybe. And so this is the Francis Ching Cube House, and I'm going to call this _lines. And then I'll go ahead and click on export. This export process used to take a while. It's relatively fast now. Okay, so that's done. The next piece of this is I want to start to show some different things such that I can combine them together. I'm going to jump over, and on the digital tools site, under tutorials, if we go to SketchUp, there's the styles for Photoshop. It's SketchUp 4.4. And this will walk through everything that I'm talking about right now. Okay? So we started with hidden line from the default styles list. Right? The shadows were already off, so we didn't worry about it. Right? Now we're going to come down here. We export a 2D graphic. The next one is that we're going to change and show something called X-ray mode. And so I have my default hidden styles shown here. If I go to the Edit tab, right, I have some flexibility here. If we move all the way, sorry, I forget where it's hidden, right? If we move to this one, which is called the Face Settings button, okay, we can then click on what's called X-ray, and we get a view very much the same as our line view, except that now we see the grayed out version of what all the cubes look like. So it's a little bit of a 2D view, or a see-through view. So now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And this time, I had lines last time. I'll call this X-ray. If I can type. And I'll go ahead and export. Okay, so now I'm going to turn those back on. Oops. So I'm going to uncheck the X-ray. And this time, I'm going to turn on the shadows. So I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to check the box for shadows. And then I'm also going to go to Window, Shadows, so that I get the Shadow Settings dialog box here. Okay? This allows me to set a date and a time for this particular view. I don't care what date this is or where it is. What we're going to do is we're going to adjust the time and the date such that we get a shadow that we like. Okay? I picked something with shadows on this side, so I have a bright face here and I have shadows there. But I can adjust the sliders, and we can see, depending on the time of year, right, I'm going to get more or less of a shadow. Right? So maybe I like that a little bit better. Again, entirely dependent on what looks right to you. But before I do the export, I want to turn off all of the lines that are currently on. So all I have is the shadows. Okay? So I'm going to jump back here to the Styles menu, or the Styles window, and I'm going to click on this first one right here, and I'm going to uncheck the box for edges. And of course, I have a blue line showing up randomly there. Okay? So when I uncheck the edges, right here, so there it is with edges, there it is without edges, you see that all I get are the shadows. And that's the way I want it. So it's just shadows. So I'll go to File, and then Export, 2D Graphic. And this is just like the lines, except it'll be shadows. And I'll go ahead and click on Export, and now I have the shadows. Okay? Now in the tutorial, it also talks about doing one where we turn on the guides. I forget which one it is. Chances are you didn't do your drawing with guides, so just skip that one. You don't necessarily have to have them all. Okay? And so the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the artistic styles and have a look at them. So let me go ahead and turn off the shadows. So I'll go back to View, uncheck Shadows. I can turn back on my edges. And then I'm going to go back to the Select menu, and I'm going to go into a category called Sketchy Edges, right, which gives me a lot more flexibility here. These are designed to be more of an artistic look. Okay? Now, since I'm exporting at the 3000 DPI, or pixels, when I'm doing that, what is shown on the screen is a lot chunkier than what actually exports. So it'll look a little bit better than this. The lines will be a little bit thinner. So I use a couple different ones. The airbrush with endpoints can look decent. So I'll go ahead and click on the airbrush with endpoints, and I'm going to go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And I'll call this airbrush. And one of the things that's helpful sometimes is to do a variety of these, and then you can see what it looks like at the other end. The other one that I tend to like is called Pen Gray. It's right here. Now, it's a little bit lighter in lines, but it tends to look pretty good. So I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And I'll call this Pen Gray. Export. And any of these other ones, right, I could choose to use. Right? The marker might be a little fat in its look, but you can kind of look around. You know, maybe I like that one. It depends. I encourage you to kind of play around with what looks right to you and which ones you like. Some of them are you know, a little too sketchy. Some of them aren't quite sketchy enough. The point is, play around with what feels right. And you're more than welcome to do a few others. You know, maybe this one. This is a tech pen. We'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And you'll learn over time which look you tend to like the most. And I'll click Export. Okay? The important thing is, since I saved the scene, I can always come back and do new exports if I didn't like something that I did. Right? So now that I've gotten those views, I'm going to open up Photoshop. And I know this is going back in time. You guys have to remember a couple months ago when we worked in Photoshop, but it should come back relatively quickly. I'm going to go to File and then Open. Oops. And I'm going to load up that first one, the cube house lines drawing, which will load up there. And so you can see how this is much bigger and it's not as thick as it looked in Photoshop. Right? If I zoom in, though, right, all the lines are there. So we'll zoom out so we can see the whole thing. Right? Then I'm going to go to File and then Place. And I'm going to place each of the other lines. So the next one was X-ray. So I'll go ahead and place that one on top. I'll say OK. But remember, right, when I do it that way, the X-ray view is just straight on top of the lines view. I want to take the X-ray view and change the blending mode to be multiply. Right? So you guys remember back when we were doing that? The multiply makes the white stuff transparent and makes the black stuff darker. And then let's go ahead and go to File, Place. And we'll put in the shadows. And again, I want more than just the shadows, so I'll change the blending mode to multiply. And now the shadows are shining through. I'll go to File and then Place. And maybe I'll bring in the airbrush. And again, multiply. And I'll go to File and then Place. Oops, I have to say OK first. File and then Place. And we can bring in the gray pen, if I can find it. And once again, that should be multiply. And then go to File and then Place. And I think the last one was the tech pen. Right? I'm bringing them all in right now, and then I'll decide which ones I actually like and don't like. Okay? So if we go back to my original export, right, it's not that exciting yet. But if I start to add things like the X-ray, we add a little bit of depth to it, and it gets a little bit darker, and it punches out a little bit. If the X-ray is too strong, I can take the layer, and I can adjust the opacity down so that it's not as strong. Right? I'm going to leave it on for right now. Next thing I'm going to do is turn on the shadows. Okay? So I have the shadows view, but I'd like to enhance the shadows a little bit manually. So you guys remember way back when we did dodging and burning? Right? If I remember correctly, it was Photoshop, right, 1.5. We'll walk you through how to do it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the X-ray view so it's not so distracting right now, and I'm going to concentrate just on the shadows. And I'm going to create a new layer. So I'm going to go up to Layer, New Layer. And here I'm going to call this Dodge and Burn. And I'm going to check Overlay as my mode, and I'm going to check the box for Fill with an Overlay Neutral color, 50% gray. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And it doesn't do anything yet, which is good. Let's move this down so that it's right above the Shadows layer. And now on that Dodge and Burn layer, I'll use the Dodge and the Burn tools. So we'll start with Burn. I'll make my brush a little bit smaller. Let me zoom in a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to darken the pieces of the shadow that are kind of up under the eave, right? So that they're becoming a little bit darker. And then we'll fade that out as it gets toward the bottom. Right? That part should be a little bit lighter. So let's see here. We need this to be a little darker. Let me zoom in. And I'm using the bracket keys again to control this. All right, we'll darken that up. Oops. Like that. Go out a little bit. Right, I can darken over here. Make this a little bit bigger. If I went too far, remember I can go back to the Dodge tool, which lightens. Right, and I could lighten some highlights if I wanted to. Say that's not enough. I could lighten that up a little bit. Depending. Right, and so I can spend more time working on it. But the point is, I've changed from the flat shadows to something that has a little bit more punch to it. Right, and so I can also control, right, how this is applied by making it darker by duplicating it. So now I can have a duplicate of the Dodge and Burn, and I can make it a lot darker. It's probably too much, right? But I can also choose what the opacity level is. So if I drop the opacity down, I get less shadow. If I pull it back up, I get more shadow. Again, it's dependent on what looks right to you. But the important thing is I don't want the Dodge and Burn to affect any other layer other than the Shadows layer. So I'm going to tie the two together by clicking on the Dodge and Burn layer and pressing Control Alt G, and I have no idea where to find that in the menu structure other than it's those key commands, and I've never been able to find it anywhere else. But it's Control Alt G, and I get this little arrow, and that means that this layer is tied directly to that layer and won't affect any of the other layers. Okay, so if you get lost in that, we'll cover that many more times. Okay, so I have the Dodge and Burn. Now let me go ahead and look at, say, the airbrush. Right, if I like this view, I can do that. I get a little bit of sketchiness to it, but I also get a pretty strong background to this. I can turn back on the X-ray, so I have a little bit of X-ray information behind. Right? If I didn't like the airbrush, if that was too strong, I could go to the pen. Right? This is a little bit more subtle. If we look up here, it just crosses, right? Crosses the little intersections just a bit, and that can be very helpful from a architectural style standpoint. Right? If it's not quite strong enough, if I wanted to make that a little stronger, I could duplicate this layer. So I'll right-click on it and say Duplicate, right? And it darkens up just a little bit. And you can kind of see, I don't know if you can see it on the projector. There it is without, there it is with 1, and there it is with 2. It just darkens it a little bit more. Okay? So once I have this established and I have my, my shadows done, this is all I'm asking you to do for today. Right? From here, we'll go ahead and go to File, Save for Web. Right? And we can get a little bit closer view of what that looks like with a little bit of X-ray showing through. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. And I'll save this to my flash drive. This is what you'll post. Right? So we'll call this Complete. And I'll put it on my flash drive here under my 135 folder. Click on Save. Okay, so this is the goal. We will take this a lot further as we go forward in terms of what we do and how we enhance these, but this is kind of the early stages of getting it from SketchUp, combining some images in Photoshop, and then exporting. So you have the last 30 minutes or so of class to do this Photoshop combination. Shouldn't take too long. You don't have to spend too much time, but I want you to at least get them together and to have something that looks a little bit nicer. You don't have to pick this very generic standard view. If you want to pick a view of your SketchUp file that's, sorry, I'm going to do that a bunch of times because in Rhino you right-click to rotate. If you want to pick something that's a closer view, right, something like that, you're more than welcome to do a closer perspective of it. It's really up to you. Okay? Are there any questions? No? All right, I'll turn you loose.